Chapter 16. Royalty Comes Abroad. By this time it was dark. I struck through the woods and made for the swamp. Jim wasn't on his island in the swamp, so I tramped off in a hurry, looking for the creek where the raft was. I crowded through the willows, red hot to jump aboard and get out of that awful country. The raft was gone. My soul, but I was scared. I raised a yell, and Jim's voice answered not far off. "Good land, is that you, honey? Don't make no noise." I hurried along the bank and got aboard. Jim grabbed me and hugged me. "Lord bless you, child. I was right down show you was dead again. Jack's been here, and he reckoned you had been shot 'cause you didn't come home. I was just this minute a-startin' the raft down to the river. I was gettin' all ready to shove out as soon as Jack come to tell me for certain you was dead." I said, "All right, good. They won't find me, and they'll think I've been killed and floated down the river. Something is up there to help them think so. Don't lose any time, Jim, but shove off for the big water as fast as you can." I didn't feel easy till the raft was 2 miles below there and out in the middle of the Mississippi. Then we hung up our signal lantern and judged that we would be safe and free once more. I hadn't had a bite to eat since yesterday, so Jim got out some food, and while we had supper, we talked. I was glad to get away from the feuds, and Jim was glad to get away from the island and the swamp. We said there was no home like a raft. You feel so free and easy on a raft. 2 or 3 days and nights slid by, quiet and lovely. It was a monstrous big river down there, sometimes 1.5 miles wide. We floated along at night and tied up in the daytime. Mornings, the first thing we would see, looking away over the water, was a dull line. That was the woods on the other side. Then a pale place in the sky. Then the river wasn't black anymore, but gray. You can see little dark spots drifting along ever so far away, trading boats. And long black streaks, rafts. By and by, you can see a streak on the water where a snag breaks the swift current. You see the mist curl up off the water. The east reddens up, and the river with it. Then the breeze springs up and comes fanning so cool and fresh and sweet to smell from the woods and flowers. A little smoke wouldn't be noticed now, so we would take some fish off the line and cook up a hot breakfast. Afterwards, we would watch the lonesome river lazy along, and by lazy off to sleep. Soon as it was night, out we shoved. When we got her to about the middle, we let her float wherever the current wanted her. One morning about daybreak, I took the canoe and crossed over to the main shore, about 200 yards. I paddled up a creek among the cypress woods to look for some berries. Suddenly, here come a couple of men as fast as they can foot it. I thought I was a goner. They must be after me, or maybe Jim. But they begged me to save their lives, said they hadn't been doing anything and were being chased for it, said men and dogs were coming. They jumped right into the canoe, and I lit out for our towhead. In a few minutes, we heard the dogs baying and the men shouting. But by the time we had left the woods and struck the river, everything was quiet. We paddled over to the towhead and hid in the cottonwoods. One of these fellows was about 70. He had a bald head and gray whiskers. He wore an old battered hat and a greasy woolen shirt and ragged old jeans stuffed into his boot tops. The other fellow was about 30 and dressed about as bad. Both of them had big, fat, dirty carpet bags. After breakfast, we talked. The first thing that came out was that these two chaps didn't know one another. "Young man," said the old one, "what is your line of work, mainly?" "Printer by trade. Do a little in patent medicines, theater actor, sling a lecture sometimes. Oh, and I do lots of things. Anything that comes handy, so long as it's not work. What's your line?" "I've done a lot in the doctoring way. Laying on of hands is the best thing I do. Cure cancer and such things, and I can tell a fortune pretty well when I have somebody along to find out the facts for me. Preaching is my line too, and working in the camp meetings." Nobody said anything for a while. Then the young man heaved a sigh and said, very sadly, "Gentlemen, I will tell you the truth, for I feel I can trust you. By rights, I am a duke." Jim's eyes bugged out when he heard that, and I reckon mine did too. Yes, my great-grandfather was the eldest son of the Duke of Bridgewater. He fled to this country to breathe the pure air of freedom. The second son took the titles and the estates, but I am the rightful Duke of Bridgewater, and here I am, thrown out on the cold world, living on a raft with thieves and lawbreakers. Jim pitied him, and so did I. But the old man said, "Looky here, Bilgewater, you're not the only person that has been wronged and put out of a high place. I've had a secret birth, too. I'm the Dauphin of France." The Duke said, "You are what?" "I'm the lost Dauphin, Louis XVII. "You at your age? No. You must mean you're the late Charlemagne." You must be 600 or 700 years old at the very least. Trouble has done it, Bilgewater. Trouble has brought these gray hairs and this early baldness. Yes, gentlemen, you see before you, in rags and misery, the rightful king of France. It didn't take me long to make up my mind that they were not kings and dukes, but just low-down humbugs. But I kept it to myself. If they wanted us to call them kings and dukes, I didn't object, so long as it kept peace in the family. I learned from living with Pop that the best way to get along with this kind is to let them have their own way. They asked us a lot of questions. Why did we try to keep the raft hid? Why did we travel only at night? Was Jim a runaway slave? Goodness sakes, I said. Would a runaway slave run south? No, they said, he wouldn't. But I had to account for things some way. So, I said, my folks lived in Pike County in Missouri. They all died off but me and Pa and my brother Ike. Pa decided to go down and live with Uncle Ben 40 miles below Orleans. But when Pa squared up his debts, all we had left was $16 and our gym. So we started south on the raft. A steamboat was over the raft one night. Pa was drunk and Ike was only 4 years old, so they didn't come up again. That left only Jim and me. Then people got to coming out in skiffs and trying to take Jim away from me. They said they believed he was a runaway, so we don't travel in the daytime now. Nights, they don't bother us. Well, the Duke got out an old deck of cards, and he and the Duke played 7-Up a while, 5 cents a game. Then they got tired of that and said they would work out some plans. The Duke opened up his carpet bag and brought out a lot of little printed bills and read them out loud. One bill said the great Dr. Armand of Paris would lecture and furnish charts of character at 25 cents apiece. The Duke said he was Dr. Armand. Another bill said he was the world-famous actor Garrick in The Younger of London. In other bills, he had a lot of names and could do wonderful things. But acting is the best thing I do. Have you ever been an actor, royalty? No, said the king. You shall then, before you're a day older, said the Duke. The first good town we come to, we'll hire a hall and do the balcony scene in Romeo and Juliet. How does that strike for you? I'm in for anything that will pay, Bilgewater, but I don't know anything about play acting. Do you reckon you can teach me? Easy. So the Duke told him all about who Romeo was and who Juliet was. He said he would be Romeo and the king could be Juliet. But if Juliet is such a young gal, my bald head and my white whiskers will look odd on her maybe. Don't you worry, these country jakes won't ever think of that. Besides, you will be in costume. Juliet is in the balcony enjoying the moonlight before she goes to bed. Here's the costume for the part.
He took out a long white cotton nightshirt and a ruffled nightcap. Then the Duke got out his book and read the parts over. All the time he was reading, he pranced around and acted to show the king how it had to be done. Then he handed the book to the king and told him to learn his part by heart. The Duke said he had thought up a way we could travel by daylight without danger to Jim. He said he would fix the thing up at the town we would be coming to next. It was a little one-horse town 3 miles down the river. When we got there, Jim said I had better go ashore with the two to buy some coffee. When we landed, not a soul was stirring, streets empty and dead still like Sunday. We found an old slave sunning himself in a backyard, and he said everybody that wasn't too sick or too old had gone to a camp meeting about 2 miles in the woods. The Duke said what he was after was a printing office. We found it a little place up over a carpenter shop. Carpenters and printers all gone to meeting and no doors locked. It was a dirty, littered up place and had ink marks and handbills with pictures of horses and runaway slaves on them all over the walls. The Duke shut his coat and said he was all right now. He sat up and printed off a handbill with a picture of a runaway slave with a bundle on a stick over his shoulder and said, $200 reward under it. The reading was all about Jim and just described him to a dot. It said he was a runaway from St. Jack's Plantation 40 miles below New Orleans last winter and likely went north, and whoever would catch him and bring him back could have the reward and expenses. Now, said the Duke, after tonight, we can run in the daytime if we want to. Whenever we see anybody coming, we can tie Jim hand and foot with a rope and lay him in the wigwam and show this handbill and say we caught him up the river and are going down to get the reward. The king got directions of the camp meeting, about 2 miles back in the woods. He said he reckoned he would go and work that camp meeting for all it was worth, and I might go too. We got there in about a half an hour, fairly dripping, for it was an awful hot day. People had come from 20 miles around, the woods full of wagons and teams hitched everywhere, feeding and stomping to keep off the flies. They had sheds made out of poles and roofed over with branches where they sold lemonade and gingerbread and piles of watermelons, green corn, and such truck. The preaching was going on under the same kinds of sheds, only bigger, to hold the crowds of people. The benches made out of slabs of logs with holes bored in the round side to drive sticks into for legs didn't have any backs. The preachers had high platforms to stand on at one end of the sheds. The women had on sunbonnets, and some had linsey woolsey dresses, some gingham, and a few of the young ones had on calico. Some of the young men were barefooted, and some of the children didn't have any clothes on but a tow linen shirt. The old women kept busy knitting, and the young folks courted on the sly. At the first shed we stopped at, the preacher was lining out a hymn. He lined out 2 lines, everybody sung it, and then he lined out 2 more lines for them to sing. It was kind of grand to hear so many singing in such a rousing way. The people woke up more and more and sung louder and louder. Toward the end, some began to groan and some to shout. Then the preacher went to preaching, and in earnest, too. He went weaving first to one side of the platform and then to the other. Then he would lean down over the front of it with his arms and his body going all the time, shouting his words out with all his might. The people all the time shouting, "Glory! Amen!" and groaning and crying. The preacher went on. "Oh, come to the mourner's bench. Come black with sin. Come sick and sore. Come lame and halt and blind. Come poor and needy, sunk in shame. Come all that is sworn and soiled and suffering. Come with a broken spirit. Come in your rags and sin and dirt. The waters that cleanse is free. The door of heaven stands open. Oh, enter in and be at rest." After a while, you couldn't make out what the preacher said anymore on account of the shouting and crying. Folks got up everywhere in the crowd and worked their way by main strength to the mourners' bench with tears running down their faces. When all the mourners had got up there to the front benches, they sung and shouted and flung themselves down on the ground, just crazy and wild. Well, the first thing I knew, the king got going, and you could hear him above everybody. Next, he went charging up onto the platform, and the preacher begged him to speak to the people, and he did. He said he was a pirate, and had been a pirate for 30 years out in the Indian Ocean. His crew was thinned out last spring in a fight, and he was home now to take out some fresh men. But thanks to goodness, he was robbed last night and put ashore off a steamboat without a cent. He was glad of it, because now he was a changed man, and happy for the first time in his life. Poor as he was going to start right off and work his way back to the Indian Ocean. There he would put in the rest of his life trying to turn the pirates away from evil. It would take him a long time to get there without money, but he would get there somehow. Then he busted into tears, and so did everybody else. Then somebody called out, "Take up a collection for him, take up a collection." Half a dozen made a jump to do it, but somebody said, "Let him pass the hat around." So the king went all through the crowd, holding out his hat, swabbing his eyes, and blessing and praising and thanking the people for being so good to him and the poor pirates out in the Indian Ocean. When we got back to the raft and he counted up, he found he had collected $87.75.